Number 44 in my 50 most relevant players for SuperCoach Dream Team and AFL Fantasy for 2025 is Carlton's midfielder, Adam Cerra. He has broken down as many times as he has broken hearts in the fantasy football community, and yet he still holds a place not only in the 50 most relevant, but as a valuable piece of Carlton's premiership push. How does he fit into this side? What does it all look like? And how ultimately could he help you getting the fantasy footy silverware you are striving for in 2025? We're going to talk about him and all the potential outcomes of what might unfold this season. Joining me on this podcast for the first time, we've gone back to back with collaborators. It's fellow coaches, panelists, one of my favourites to talk fantasy footy with. It's Kane. Hello, mate. Adam Cerra's got a space in your heart as a Dynasty League owner, I know. But he is a pretty special footballer when you can kind of look past the obvious of the regular breakdown of his body.
No, MJ, he's one I'm really excited to talk about because I feel like with Adam, literally anything is possible, and that is the scary part, and that is the exciting part. I don't even know where we want to start here because I've got so many views. As you mentioned, I have been a very, very astute Adam Cerra watcher and I have him in a cash dynasty league that you were recently part of as well. So I've copped a lot of these bumps and bruises. I've took some, I've given some. When he plays, it can be really, really special. So where do you want to start? Obviously, there's a massive opportunity price-wise based on what he did last year.
Yeah, it's just the 12 games last year and a handful of times that he broke down mid-game too, which has ultimately seen his average fall right off the cliff and his scoring power based on what he had done previous seasons. Just a 72.6 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, meaning he's priced in at $745K for Fantasy and $735,400 in Dream Team, while in SuperCoach, an average of 83.1, dropping 25 points per game of average at the very least, means he's sitting under that $450,000 price range. And despite a frustrating season with a bunch of different injury concerns, unfortunately all soft tissue related, he still can score for us okay. 128 against North Melbourne in SuperCoach with his top score last year. You've got to go back to 2021 for his previous best score of 147 against the Tigers in that format. While for AFL Fantasy, just the 1 ton last year, the 106, but a 138 is his career high score against the Tigers for AFL Fantasy. Like, everything went wrong for him last year, didn't it? Like, supremely skillful, probably the Blues' best creator when it comes to forward half movement of their ball. Just the ultimate connector in this midfield to the forward line, and yet 1 AFL Fantasy ton last year. 2 SuperCoach tons last year. Despite it, by the way, including his injury-impacted games, 4 scores under 80. So even when he's breaking down, he's scoring okay in SuperCoach for us. But everything went wrong for him, and probably fair to say for the Blues last year, didn't it?
Yeah, MJ, it feels like they've got a list that can genuinely contend, and yeah, it just didn't come together. And obviously that finals loss was over really quickly in a hurry to the Premiers in Brisbane. So when you look at Cerra, the first thing I think that jumps out is, as you mentioned, how many times he's broken down. Like, you just go back to round 18 in 2023, there's been 5 instances where he's finished the game on the bench since then.
Wow.
So we're talking about 30 weeks of home and away football, 5 instances he hasn't played. That's not even including the games he's missed in between. So that frequency of breaking down mid-game or ending the game on the bench because there's some awareness or caution with a hamstring or a soft tissue injury, that is super, super alarming. I know in some of these formats now we do have that 23rd that can help us cover some of these injury scores, but the outlay of cash that we're still giving him, Jay, he's not a rookie. Like, we're still talking about a guy priced in the 70s and 80s. So if we cop one of these 30s or 40s, cash gen gone, now he's out of the team, we've got to replace him at a price range that can be really awkward, particularly if he breaks down in the early part of the season. So there's massive, massive risk of, at that price, with this injury concern, what are my parachute options? I think that's the thing that for a lot of people, they'll see him and go, this is not a headache I want to set myself up with from the jump. Whereas we know on the flip side, This is a guy that nearly averaged 110 in 2023 in SuperCoach. This is a guy that's been perennially a mid-90s guy since his last year at Freo and since he's joined the Blues. So when you look at that and you dive even deeper and see what some of his best stretches of footy have been, he's been a 105 guy in AF and he's been a 120 guy in SuperCoach for half a season. So when you put the other end of the spectrum and go, what if Adam Cerra comes out in the first 8 weeks, plays his best footy, he's 100 plus in DT, 110 plus in SuperCoach. I'm off to the races. And I think that's why the conversation with Cerra is so fascinating, MJ, because you've got the, oh my God, he could break down at any moment, to, oh my God, what if he puts it together and he's 20 to 30 points underpriced? But then the really fascinating thing, I think this is where his relevance is different to a lot of players that we'll speak about in the 50s. Okay, if you start with him, you're obviously riding it out. But what if after 4 weeks, he is at 100 and he's at 110 in SuperCoach and you're a non-owner? Do you have the belief in him to trade into him and try to get more of that gravy train and continue it on? Or are you scared off to make that move? I think that's where it's going to get so fascinating, is whether you start him, whether you don't start him, whether you want to have a look early and then jump on. Do you have the courage to jump on, the conviction to do it? How do you see that? Because there's not many players, MJ, that carry relevance in a starting squad in a early part of the trade season and also into that midpoint of the season where we're hopefully, if he's done his job, I guess, looking to jump off.
Yeah, I'm of the belief, I'm very black and white when it comes to injury impacted players. I'm always of the belief that if you are going to want any piece of them, it's in your starting squad. It's to maximize the opportunity for games played. And if you fade them in your starting squad for the only reason, which is they've got a bad injury history, I'm of the belief that it's like, mate, you've just got to back that in, because otherwise you're now going to use 2, potentially 3 trades, depending on the trade movements you have to do, to get him in and then out of your side, not just the one parachute up to the other mid-pricer that's popping, or go down.
So MJ, if you're saying if you didn't start Cerra,
I wouldn't pick him.
And you even if you saw a 120 in the first couple of weeks, and he's on the bubble in some of these formats that don't have the rolling price movements, you'd be saying, I'm sticking off. If it's just injury is your concern, you're saying. If you've said, hey, this body, I don't trust this guy.
Yeah, look, if you like another mid-pricer in this price range, different story. And I think the other element to add to that is then, what's the risk profile of players with injuries that's already existing in your team? Like a great example is the player we kicked off the 50 most relevant with in Sean Darcy. Well, if you're backing in Darcy because the fixture's right, the price is right, and now you're choosing Cerra as well, well, your risk profile for injuries in your team is ever increasing. Whereas if you don't have multitudes of these guys, well, maybe you can afford that trade in. But for me, I'm pretty black and white around it, which is, if the reason you fade around Cerra is the body and the health, you shouldn't be surprised to see him go 110, 115, 120 to the start of the year. Like, even just looking at that 2023 season that you alluded to, SuperCoach is a 108.3 average, 12 tons, 7 scores over 120, and nothing under 75 for the year. Whereas AFL Fantasy, 9 tons in that 96.6 average, 4 120s, including back-to-back-to-back weeks of going 130. So the scoring to me should not be surprising. If he comes out against the Tigers and drops a 125, no one should be like, oh, I wonder what he's going to do. That's what he does when he's fit. He's a 95
but MJ,
guy.
You know people fantasy. Will, though. That's the thing. That is the thing with fantasy that's always so fascinating. We don't care about a player until we see something that makes people change. And I think that's where we're going to have this crossroads, whether it's after round 2, whether it's round 3 or 4, whether it's people who started him looking to jump off, and just how much of these profits they look to make if he does get a good start. I think this is the crazy thing about Cerra, is that you look at this start to the season and some of these games, we mentioned Richmond off the bat, but in the first nine games, 7 of them are in Melbourne. The other 2 are in Adelaide, 1 for gather round against West Coast, the other for the Crows. So there is a run and a fixture here that you can take advantage of, in my opinion, that if Adam Cerra is at his best, there is minimum 20 points of upside in the formats. And I think that's the thing that people will struggle with. If they go another mid-pricer and they don't start Cerra, but he starts well himself, having that courage to jump across to a guy that has this injury history, it's a really hard call to make.
One of the things I like about why I would advocate for starting Cerra, again, it's got to sit into your team's risk profile. You've got to take all 30 or 31 in Dream Team and SuperCoach squad selections into account with this. But it's a player like him, there's the reward of a 115, 120 in SuperCoach run, a 105 run in AFL Fantasy for 6, 8, 9 weeks, as you've alluded to. I go, well, where can I get protection from this? Well, I think in Dream Team and SuperCoach, you're always protected with the flex and one of your player scores dropping out. Now, ideally, you don't want it to be Cerra's. You want it to be that rookie that just got a bad roll, got subbed out, something happened. But it does add an element of protection that you didn't have 12 months ago. In addition, 3 of the first 4 games of the year are best 18. And he's the perfect type of player to put in a best 18 scenario.
Yeah, and I think that's why, MJ, I feel like he's going to be such an important pick, right or wrong. If you start him and you're right, wow, that's going to be a massive pick, and it's going to be really hard for a lot of other coaches to jump on. On the flip side, if you start him and he breaks down or he struggles and he just produces what he's priced at, now you're caught with a really awkward player as well. So that's where I feel like there is this massive risk reward, because if he does start well, I can see a lot of coaches being hesitant to jump on just because of the history of his body.
I think when we look at this Carlton midfield mix, there was some concern that maybe he's been kind of surged past in this midfield group, but he offers a skill set that nobody else currently on the list does. Like, Walsh is a great runner and a really nice all-round player, but he's not a high-skilled user of the footballer. Cripps has got better at that, but still at his purest best, he's a contested ball-winning freak. Hewitt, more defensively minded. Doherty, does he even play through the midfield? I think probably does. Smith's more an accumulator, but not a high-end ball user. Cerra offers something to their ball movement that nobody in the mid to centre part, centre forward, actually offers. With guys like Newman and Sard off the back line, they don't have to have that kicking so much there. He's surgical like in how he uses it. So how do you see this Blues midfield mix? Because to me, he's their most creative ball user. Others do plenty of great stuff that adds to their forward offense, but I don't see any player in this Carlton list doing what he does, centre forward of the ball.
Yeah, I think Cerra should be in there, MJ. I think a lot of the times he was moved out was because he wasn't at peak shape. And I think they were trying to find a role for him that was less demanding or more suited to the fitness that he was currently in. So I feel like if he has the preseason that he wants and he gets his body right, he should be what he's sort of been at Carlton, which is basically mid-50s to low 60s centre bounce guy, mixing and matching in there. Yes, he can play other flanks of the ground if required, but I feel like you're right. That's where he's at his best. He's an incredible connector. He's one that can really, as I said, just create scores, especially by foot, that a lot of guys can't do in that Carlton team. He's a really creative player. It's not a long punishing kick like a Bontempelli or a Jordan Dawson type, but it's those pockets and those kicks, almost like what, Grind Myers and Dylan Moore can do, where they can work up and just basically make something out of nothing. So Adam plays more through the midfield than those two guys, but super important nonetheless. So for me, that move to the halfback and these other roles, I feel like was just, hey, this is the situation we're at. It's mid-season. He's struggling to play full midfield. Let's find another role for him. But I think if all goes well in the pre-season, he's back to what he's been in his best years at Carlton of 23.
Yeah, I'm with you. Look, that early fixture that we alluded to, the Tigers at round 1, Hawks round 2, not great. Dogs round 3, positive. Pies round 4, positive. Eagles round 5, positive. So a nice juicy run, but what's the risk profile you want to introduce into your side? How much of it and where do you want to take it? He's not a breakout player, although priced at that you hope could get to that high 90s, 100 range. He's a proven performer with a different narrative for why he's priced here. If you're buying in this range, do you want the guy that's got a better durability, but not the proven numbers over time? Or do you want the guy that's got the proven data, but has the risk profile of breaking down, unfortunately, consistently mid-game? If you look over the last 2 years alone, he's a guy that just keeps scoring for us. If he plays 70% of game time or more since the start of 2023, he's going an average of 103 in SuperCoach and a 93 in fantasy. If he does that for 6 to 8 weeks at his price point, you are away. When to get off might be the challenging thing, but knowing you need to get off is definitely sitting in there. Draft fascinates me here, Kane, because, man, a player with this level of injury risk in a salary cap, it's like, it hurts, but it's a trade. It affects your upgrade cadence a little bit, affects your cash generation movement plans, but it's fixable in a week. With as many injuries and games missed as he's had for draft, it does make it hard to value him based on his potential, because your best ability is your availability. And frankly, he's never really had a great one. So
no,
where do you see him going on draft day on the keeper platform?
Oh, I think MJ is still going to be valued for a lot of people in that mid-80s to, mid to high 80s, I think, is where people will value him from an AFL fantasy point of view. Excuse me. I think you still know what the potential is. So I think when you see him at a 72, clearly he's going, well above that. As you flagged, though, and it's super important in draft for exactly that reason, it's just not easy to replace guys when you lose them, especially if you're playing with a shallow bench. Like, it's just an absolute pain point. So, keeper's got this injury slot, which could be really good. Not that we want to use it for Adam Cerra, but it is there. So for me, he's in that mid-80s, high 80s, low 90s, we know is the possibility. But I think, really, what is he, MJ? Probably you want him at M5, M6. He's probably where I think you want him. You don't want him too much higher than that. So typically, I know we like to invest in the midfield, that you probably even would love him down as an M6, M7 type of range, just to cover yourself. And as we always say with draft, you probably do need to draft an extra mid and one that's durable and not take on too many of these guys like Cerra, because, unfortunately, as much as we don't want to look into it, the injury numbers are there for everyone to see.
Yeah, look, the upside here is you're getting an M3 scorer. The downside is you're getting a guy that's going to play half the season, hurt you with a couple of injury-impacted games, and you're going to hope that if that happens, it's during your injury threshold time, if you've got that turned on the keeper platform, or not. So I'm with you. If you get him, I think he's going to return value for you, and you've just got to protect that pick with the way you draft that little bit deeper in your midfield than maybe you might normally, just because of that. Hey, mate, always a pleasure talking fantasy footy with you. We'll get you back on later during the 50 to talk about another player that's in my most relevant countdown.
Thank you, MJ. Enjoyed it as always. Good luck, mate. Only 40 to go.
Thanks so much. So helpful. If you want to go back and check out any of the other players that are in the countdown so far, they're available on this channel. If you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, we'd love you to do so and comment below. Not only what do you think Adam's going to average, how many games do you think he's going to play in 2025? If you're listening to this as an audio podcast and you haven't given us a 5-star rating, please make sure you do so. And check out all the places where you can join the conversation across social media: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, X. We are on all of those platforms. The links are in the description of this episode, as well as where you can get access to the Coaches Panel store, become part of our Patreon, and a bunch of other great elements that you need to know. All those details are in the description of this episode. So what are we? A week deep into the 50 most relevant, number 43. Who's up tomorrow? There was a point in time last year that if you didn't own him, he was taking the season away from you. There was a point in time that regardless of the line that he was eligible for, he was in that territories of must-have. But was that at the start of the season where he was creating separation? Or was it at the end of the season that he was flying home? Because there was a point of the year that he was the one in his line that if you didn't have, you were hating watching it from a league matchup or a rankings battle. He was killing you every single week. And then there was another portion in the year where it paid to be against him because he was delivering far from that top end. Who is this yo-yoed premium? And what will we see in 2025? Will it be the best or the worst of him? Because whichever side you jump on, it'll either be a guy that screams incredible value as an upgrade or someone that will just get priced out of your range way too fast, depending how he starts the season. Who is he? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 Most Relevant.